This is called Dreams of Starlight. Ever since the invention of digital time-telling devices, Chronoctis and Chiromus cherished every second they spent on the job. They lived and worked in an elderly couple's antique grandfather clock. In the early mornings, before the old husband rose to let the cat out and set the tea kettle to boil, Chiromus pulled the strings attached to the two hands of the clock until the positions of the hands matched the time written in the stars. In the late evenings, after the old wife had cleaned up the dinner dishes and set out a bowl of milk for the cat, Chronoctis would scale the mother-of-pearl clock face and push the hands until they matched the time written in the stars. It was back-breaking work keeping the clock, and indeed all of the time it controlled accurate. Most days they only needed to spend a few minutes actually keeping the time, but it required constant observation in case the clock slipped away from the true time of the stars. Neither Chronoctis nor Chiromus had ever seen the stars. "They must be beautiful and bright, like the light that shines in the day," Chiromus said to Chronoctis during one of their many, endless stretches of silent watchfulness. It was midday, halfway between Chiromus's tasks and Chronoctis's. "Impossible," Chronoctis said, in a voice that claimed knowledge of all things. "They're faint and mysterious, well beyond the understanding of two simple timekeepers." Chiromus disagreed, and when she lay down to sleep the afternoon away, she dreamed of stars. They were vast, glowing creatures with voices that ticked like clockwork and eyes that shined with centuries. They didn't stand on legs like the old husband and the old wife, nor did they flicker like tiny, barely corporeal shadows as Chiromus and her brother did. The stars were so much more, with hands that constantly moved, weaving the endless silk of time. "It is time," the stars said, their voices at once coming from all around Chiromus and from nowhere. It was as if she had always known the words, but was only now aware of them. "Come to us, timekeeper." The dream shifted into bright shades of colorless light, and Chiromus jerked away with the fading image of stars in her mind. It was 3:30, she knew, and 47 seconds. Chronoctis' timekeeping wouldn't begin until 9. At the moment, he sat watching the progress of their antique charge in its steady march onward through time. Tick, 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 tick. In moments like these, Chiromus imagined that constant rhythm lasting forever, continuing even if timekeepers weren't around to maintain it. Chiromus continued to lie there, but she did not go back to sleep. The grandfather clock stood sentinel at the end of the hallway. Even though Chronoctis was intently listening to the soft passing of time, he could not hear the old husband talking to his wife in the kitchen. "I feel like I picked up something today," the old husband said, his gray eyebrows furrowed in frustrated concentration. "You did," the old wife grunted. "The newspaper." "No, I mean a cold," the old husband said. The old wife frowned. "Why on earth would you pick up a cold?" The old husband shook his head. He wasn't in the mood for her games, not with a cold sort of ache spreading through his chest. "I think I'll go to bed early tonight," he said. Bored and alone in the silent house that evening, the old wife went to bed early too. The sun had begun to set, as it was summer and the sun set late in the day, when she walked past the old grandfather clock to bed. Chronoctis had just started his evening climb of the clock face when Chiromus slipped out of the clock and landed on the carpet without a sound. "Where are you going?" Chronoctis called. Chiromus only turned because of the panic in his voice. He clung to the X of the 10, his eyes as wide and dull as the clock's inner gears. "I need to see the stars," Chiromus called back. She had never left the clock before, not since it had been crafted and she and Chronoctis had been created to tend it. It was impossible for her to keep the tremor out of her voice. Chiromus and Chronoctis both felt the whine of time slipping as the clock and the stars began to misalign. Chronoctis threw himself at the minute hand and jerked it into the proper position. He swore and lost his grip and slid down the clock face, barely catching himself on the V of the 6. Chiromus knew her brother would be fine, and that she needed to be outside to greet the stars when they appeared. She ran down the hallway, light and ghostly. As she ran, she whispered a promise, unheard to Chronoctis, that she would be back on the clock by 4, when her task would begin. Chronoctis couldn't leave the clock untended, but he couldn't let Chiromus run off on her own. He stared down at the carpet miles below, and braced himself for the jump, just when the whine started again. Time rarely slipped more than twice in a day, but he couldn't take a break to ponder this. He had a clock to tend. Chiromus wouldn't be able to help him anyway. He was the night keeper, and only he could fix the clock when it slipped in the dark. Opening the sliding glass was no more difficult than resetting the clock, and Chiromus slipped out into the night. The sky was fading from light dark blue into black. There were no lights on in the house, and Chiromus kept her eyes fixed on the sky. She wasn't sure when she became aware of the first star. It was in the corner of her eye, faint, the color of the face of her clock. There was another across the sky, bigger and brighter and everything Chiromus had seen in her dream. She felt lighter than she ever had. "It is time," she said, repeating what the stars had said in her dream. The stars twinkled and blinked and tapped out, in a language of time, a solemn acknowledgement. Karamis didn't like the tone of her message, and she felt another whine as time shifted. Chronoctus was having a difficult job wrangling time, she thought. She turned her eyes away from the stars above and back toward the old couple's house. But where she looked, she saw only stars, and all around her she felt the whine of their voices, of time spiraling away from her. Chronoctus was too exhausted to wonder what had become of Karamis. If he let go of the clock's hands, time would spin beyond his control. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to hold on until Karamis would take over in the morning. He wasn't sure how long he'd been holding on when the whine of time started in his chest, becoming so loud and strong that it rattled his every atom. He held on as long as possible, determined to keep the time in check for as long as he could. But he knew, perhaps better than anyone, that when time slips free, relatives like long and brief no longer matter. When the hands of the clock finally broke his grip and he tumbled downward for the last time, he imagined he could see the stars, and he hoped Karamis had found them as beautiful as he did. In the early dawn of the next morning, no one reset the clock that no longer kept time, and no one got up to put the tea kettle on in the kitchen.